All right, hello and welcome to this episode. Today we're going to talk about why a lot of people struggle with exposure and response prevention, or ERP, and really why a lot of people feel like they fail implementing this. And what I want to do in this episode is really talk about three things that are very important to understand in order to be successful when implementing ERP if you're struggling with something like OCD or anxiety. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Codde. I'm the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And if you benefit from the show, really appreciate your support by liking, subscribing, and leaving a nice review on Spotify or the podcast. And if you're looking for help on your journey, head over to restoredminds.com as we have a bunch of resources for you. We also have a whole new starter pack that's totally free. So we'll have a link down in below, and you can also see that on the homepage of our site, Restored Minds. So let's go ahead and dive in today. So why do people fail with ERP, or why do certain people, believe that ERP doesn't work for them, or any of that? So I'm going to go through three answers, and they're all going to be, each one's going to be targeted to a very specific application. So the first reason most people fail is they try to do it themselves, and they don't understand what they're doing. They don't do it correctly, and they oftentimes bite off more than they can chew, or try to do too much too fast, and they don't have the big concept of what they're even doing. And they think that I'm going to use ERP to try to get rid of my feelings and thoughts, and that's not what it's designed to do. What it's designed to do is to remove the behaviors that you're engaging in, and allow for you to confront the actual energy of fear, right, or the emotion of fear. And when you're trying to use a tool for something that it's not designed to do, people perceive that it's a failed attempt, but really it's just a matter of using the tool incorrectly. So a lot of people, they read about it online, or they watch a video or something, and they're like, okay, I'm going to just do this myself, not knowing that they just don't know what they don't know, and they do it incorrectly. They implement it with the wrong intention, and then they conclude that it didn't work for them, when really they never got the appropriate guidance, and they never really did it correctly in the first place. So that's probably the main majority of why I see a lot of people fail with ERP. Second reason is kind of what I alluded to in the first, but just more specifically, when let's say you go into a practitioner, an ERP specialist or an OCD and anxiety specialist, and I see and hear this a lot from clients that I work with, is they'll go to someone, and the person will tell them to do ERP, and that person has never actually experienced it firsthand and doesn't understand a lot of the nuances of implementing it. And so their idea is we're just going to flood this person with a certain trigger or a certain stimulus. And what happens is that the person, let's say the person is afraid of germs. And so the ERP practitioner, the coach, consultant, therapist, whatever title they have, they tell the person, yeah, I know how to do ERP. And they'll go and, let's say the person's afraid of germs or doorknobs, they'll have them touch a bunch of doorknobs, right? And in theory, that looks good on paper, but the reality is ERP is only effective if you remove all compulsions. So it's two components, right? First, there's the exposure aspect, and then there's the response prevention aspect, where you're removing all the compulsions post the exposure. Now, what happens a lot of times is that the person can, the therapist or facilitator can actually integrate an exposure, right? Because the person tells you what they're afraid of, and they're like, okay, we're going to do this exposure. And they believe they're helping you, right? It's generally very well intended. They're just, there's a certain level of incompetence that they're unaware of, that they don't know about, right? The facilitator. So they think that merely doing the exposure itself is ERP, when in actuality, what a lot of people do is mental compulsions after the exposure. So to use this as an example, let's use the germ example, or the contamination example. So let's say that the person says, okay, hey, we're going to do a germ exposure, and we're going to have you touch doorknobs. Number one, we want to make sure that it's actually that we're doing exposures that the person can succeed at. So we don't want to throw more at someone than they're really competent and capable of handling at that time. Number two, if they prevent you from washing, that's actually one compulsion that you could engage in. But if you sit there and you don't wash and then you go and ruminate or you mentally analyze or you do all these mental compulsions, you're not actually doing ERP, right? You're merely replacing the compulsion and doing a mental one instead of a physical. So what's happening, you're doing an exposure and then you're engaging in a bunch of compulsions, which is actually going to make the wheel spin faster and you're actually going to get worse. So if the person isn't teaching you what to do with as far as mental compulsions and physical compulsions, they really don't understand the nuances of implementing ERP correctly. So that's another reason people fail with ERP is they will think that they're doing ERP because the person that they're working with is telling them they're doing ERP because they did an exposure, but then they do a bunch of compulsions, even unknowingly, like the mental compulsions. And what that causes is the loop to intensify and they feel like they're getting worse, and they actually are because they're just engaging in different compulsions. It would be the same. It would almost be equivalent to the idea of the person, touching a contaminated item and then instead of washing their hands with soap, they went and used hand sanitizer. Like, yeah, technically they didn't do the normal compulsion of washing with soap, but because they still use hand sanitizer, they still complete the wheel, right? And so doing mental compulsions is the same thing. So if you're doing mental compulsions, you're not really doing ERP, which is another reason people fail and get frustrated and quit. So, and this leads to the third reason that people struggle or don't, have a hard time with success with ERP. And again, it's not their fault, right? A lot of this is just a lot, like what I've come to find is a lot of people who claim that they really understand how to help people with exposure response prevention or really help people with OCD and anxiety. There's a lot of nuances to this. And even though there's well-intended people out there trying to help people, if you don't understand these nuances, it's going to potentially cause more problems, And the reason I'm presenting this is because this is serious, and it's not really about like whether it ruffles people's feathers or not, because it's just the reality of things. So the last problem is that they use ERP to desensitize to a trigger as opposed to actually release fear from the body. Now, so a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll do ERP and the, facilitator, let's just use that word, will have them focus on their specific content of their fear, right? So in this case, let's say it's germs and contamination, and the ERP will be triggered to certain it will be geared towards certain triggers, doorknobs, i.e., whatever the person is really focused on. And they'll do ERP enough to where the person desensitizes to the trigger. Now, this is the whole theory of the idea of habituation is that you can't have the same reaction to something if you experience it, hundreds of times because your nervous system desensitizes to it. So you stop having that fight or flight response. And while this is better than nothing, there's a higher level of ERP that we can engage in, right? Which is actually releasing the actual fear that the person is experiencing and holding on to in their body from like an energetic standpoint. And when you understand that fear is not caused externally, right? It's caused internally. We project it onto our environment. So with something like contamination, doorknobs don't cause fear. They are merely a projection of our own fear onto the doorknob. So when you try to solve the doorknob as a problem, you're solving the projection. You're not confronting the source. And the issue with that is then what happens is once we desensitize ourselves to a certain a certain stimulus, let's say a doorknob, the fear will just project onto something else. And this is why people will say, well, my themes change over time, right? Oh, well, I had this theme and then that got better. And then all of a sudden I have this theme and now that got better. And now I have this theme. And that leads people to assuming this idea that this is this chronic condition that you're going to just have for the rest of your life and you have to learn to manage. And how we manage it is we always desensitize the triggers through ERP. And it's like, no, like desensitizing a trigger can happen, but that's not actually what real success in ERP is. Real success is you have the exposure, and by staying conscious, you're able to, again, not engage in the content and then actually confront fear in the body itself. And by doing, the process, right, and actually letting go of the fear itself, you remove the source, and then therefore you no longer need to project it onto your environment. And that allows you to move into a higher energy state where you're now able to perceive things totally differently. This is, in my opinion, what the best ERP is really. When people understand these concepts here that I just talked about, they're facilitating the highest level of ERP, which is going to facilitate the highest level of change and transformation in an individual. So to recap, again, you trying to do it yourself, you either bite off more than you can chew, you don't do it correctly, there's nuances you don't understand. Okay, we understand that. That's why a lot of people, and then what people do is they falsely. So when you experience any of these kind of struggles, the false conclusion that people arrive to is that it doesn't work for me, and it's like, no, you're not doing it correctly. Okay, because you and I have the same nervous system, right? The same emotional states, and we have the same abilities to heal. So biting off more you can chew, doing it yourself, getting a facilitator who really doesn't understand this, and so you're still engaging in compulsions, especially the mental ones, or doing a very minimalist idea of, I'm going to desensitize a certain trigger, which is really desensitizing the projection and not confronting the literal source of fear within you, which is what, if you remove yourself from the projection, is what you actually have the ability to do. And that is going to facilitate the highest healing. So again, hope this was helpful. Hope you really receive this. And again, if you're looking for help with this in your own life, I would really encourage you to complete an application for TBC, because this is really what I teach people how to do in integrating not only this tool, but other tools in their life, because these nuances matter. And they're the things that make the difference between, hey, I got better, I kind of improved, versus I really recovered, or I really, broke out of that loop and experienced a true transformation in my life. So hope this was helpful. Wish you guys a great week and much success on your journey. And with that, I'll see you on the next episode. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com, as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.